things that I think that you can say about John Macleay is just how tenacious he was. I mean, he was in and out of the jail, but every single time they knocked him down, he'd get back up. And I think today, when you look at what's going on in the world, it's that which we need more than ever. And also the fact that he would put everything else, and particularly would put the cause of revolutionary socialism above his own life every single time. And he saw himself as a vehicle for that kind of politics. He was put in jail a total of 5 times, and he was released early 3 out of those 5 times because of popular pressure, showing you the type of relationship that he built with ordinary people throughout his life. During that, he was subject to food poisoning, to sensory deprivation, and he earned the title as Britain's most dangerous man from Lloyd George, who was the Prime Minister at the time. His body was so badly battered and bruised through a lifetime of political struggle, as I say, in and out of jail. They ended up dying in St Andrew's Day in 1923. And the years leading up to that were revolutionary years. There were years of both war and revolution. The First World War, of course, but also the Russian Revolution. We'll get into that and how he navigated that. Just hugely important, historic and difficult and complex time, how he navigated it and what he put forward as his key ideas. He began his political career by joining the Pollock Shaw's branch of something called the Progressive Union. And what this was a club where people discussed science, they discussed literature, they discussed politics. And he was clearly very engaged in not just revolutionary ideas and Marxism, but in a whole sweep of discussions that would take place around that. And a lot of that was down to his mother, because his father died young, but his mother was absolutely determined that despite living as a result of his father's death in poverty, they would complete his education, and he did that, and he went on to Glasgow University, where he got his masters. And he trained as a teacher, and it's well known, of course, that John Macleay was a teacher, but I think it's wrong to say that to describe John Macleay as a teacher and only a teacher. I think far more he is a revolutionary above all else. And in 1903, he joined his first political organisation, his first political party, which was the Social Democratic Federation. This was the first Marxist organisation in Britain, and he quickly made a name for himself because he was speaking to groups of people at factory gates, he was speaking inside party meetings, and he was constantly putting forward a range of ideas that were aimed always concretely at taking political struggle forward. And so during the summer holidays, he would be touring the industrial centres of Scotland, where he would make speeches about the need for working class organisation and about the need to take on capitalism. I think it's also worth pointing out that he taught, and very successfully taught, Marxist economics. And he taught this to trade unionists, he taught this to political activists, but also to members of the public. And at the height of these meetings, he would be doing sometimes 5 meetings a day that would be attended sometimes by hundreds of people. And so one of the things that we draw out very immediately about John Macleay's approach is that he's very much wanting to raise people's political education. He's wanting to raise people's political ideas. During the World War I, we'll talk more about this, but before and during World War I, he was a clear opponent of the war, which he viewed as a capitalist war for markets. And he found himself sometimes, very often in fact, in a minority on this when it comes to the rest of the left. In 1911, he joined the newly formed British Socialist Party, and that's where he continued his anti-war campaigning. And obviously, as I've already said, this brought him into conflict with the law and with the state. He was first arrested in 1915 for uttering statements that were calculated to prejudice recruiting to conscription to go and send people to fight in World War I. His first arrest was then quickly followed by him being dismissed as a school teacher. So very quickly he loses his job, the career which he's trained in, And it's just, I think, a testament to him as an individual, that rather than this making him choose some safer options for his life or receding from a political activity, he used it as an excuse to spend even more time on organising politically and organising revolutionary ideas. Of course, this was not the first time that he was going to be arrested, and he was arrested again many times where he was found guilty time and time again of sedition against the state. And when the Bolsheviks came to power in 1917, he was appointed Soviet Counsel to Scotland, and this is why, well, in part, he's sometimes referred to as the Scottish Lenin. Lenin personally thought very highly of John Maclean. Of course, the office which was opened up for this Soviet Council was never recognised by the British state, and it was under constant intimidation. It's also, I think, when you think about the level of state repression which he, and not just him, but the whole movement at the time faced, it does make you think about just how courageous the struggle of the working class, just how courageous the struggle of people like John Maclean and other working class leaders was. They were risking their liberty, they were risking their life, and when you think about activism today, we are not at this point anyway risking our life or our liberty, although some of us may have come into conflict with the state, and we should think about that whenever we think that things are hard or that activism is difficult, just how much more difficult it was back then. Now, the Clyde District Defence Committee was formed in the aftermath of his trial, in in 1918, and this was set up to raise popular pressure on getting released from jail. When you think about this, it involved weekly marches, not just in Glasgow, and not even just in London, where there were demonstrations, but across Europe and into Russia. John Maclean was understood internationally to be a prized asset of the socialist movement, and that's why workers right across the continent rallied to his cause. In 1920, he then becomes at odds with both the British Socialist Party and the Social Democratic Party on the basis of his support for a Scottish Communist Party. We'll talk a bit more about that in a few minutes. And he also formed things like the Tramp Trust Unlimited, which people will know, which is a revolutionary flying squad, 5 or 6 people, one of them was in fact Peter Marshall, and they would go around factories, they would go around and tour the industrial centres, and they would agitate and argue for socialist ideas and for socialist politics. Now, we're getting there, because I'm just giving you an outline of his life before we go into some detail about some of the, I think, the most important elements of it. In 1921, after making a speech and opening a meeting in Airdrie, encouraging miners to agitate themselves for revolutionary purposes, he was once again arrested and charged once again with sedition. And he was sentenced to 3 months in prison, and he was classified as a political prisoner. And again, after his release, when you think about the toll this has taken on his life, but yet again, after he's released in 1921, he then gets straight back into political activity, where he was then found guilty again and sent to prison. And in 1922, he was released, and there was thousands of people on his last release from jail who greeted him, but by then his health was such that he couldn't address them. Partly this was because he was being force-fed through pipes down his throat, and it had deeply damaged his throat and he couldn't speak. Now, he died, as I said, on St Andrew's Day at the age of 44. Tragically young, I mean, for the time, of course, not as young as it is now, but clearly still had a huge role to play. And he died under circumstances where his political project, and we're going to talk a wee bit about this, his political project wasn't what it might have been. The Scottish party that he had set up, a revolutionary party, but also one that was pro-independence, focused on dismantling the British state, never grew to any sizable amount. In the last elections he stood on before he died, the ticket that he stood on received very derisory number of votes. I want to talk now a bit about his politics and his method, and I'll mainly talk about this in relation to First World War. But Maclean was never one who was in favour of rhetoric without action, and he often thought to himself that the leading leftists of the time were very strong in rhetoric, but less so when it came to substance. And there were all kinds of manoeuvres, all kinds of intrigue taking place, but John Maclean always subordinated his own personal political ambitions behind his politics. He always started with the political situation as he saw it and how best to advance the cause of the working class in that framework. And so whatever critique people might have of John Maclean, one thing that we can safely say is that regardless of some of the disagreements you may have with him later on in his life, this was a man of substance, of moral fibre. This was someone completely and utterly devoted to his socialist cause, and he never put himself or his own personal anxieties or antagonisms with any other individual ahead of the political struggle. Now, one of the things that he wanted to impress upon the socialist organisations of the day was that it was vitally important to link struggles together. And I think this is something that we should just maybe spend a moment thinking about. When he went to speak to workers who were taking part in a dispute, maybe over wages or over the working conditions, he was never speaking just about that dispute. What he would always do was to link that up to questions facing the entirety of the working class. And so he was against propagandism, he was against the idea that you could avoid building a political organisation, and his project was very much the idea that you needed to build a political organisation that linked together the various struggles that were taking place. And the struggles that were taking place at the time, before World War I, were pretty immense. They would involve tens of thousands of people. They would involve real militancy. The years leading up to World War I, trade union organisation actually doubled its membership. And when World War I comes along, Britain becomes gripped by jingoism and patriotism, false patriotism put forward by the press of the day. Of course, we can also make parallels with today. But the outbreak of the war was also pounced on by the ruling class of the day to beat back the development of workers' organisation and workers' struggles. So along with the war, they clamped down on civil liberties, they clamped down on the right to organise in trade unions, and they, at the same time as that, sort of brought that together, bound that together with the sense that if you dare to undermine the war effort, then you are a traitor to the nation. And this had a huge impact on the left internationally, and it caused a deep, deep crisis in the Socialist International. Because what was happening was that the pressures were such that national governments ended up being supported by individual national socialist parties across Europe. And this led to a split and to essentially complete disarray in terms of the framework of international socialism. Lenin, of course, stood completely opposed to this and said that what needed to happen was that an internationalist form of organisation needed to arise, in that workers, instead of turning their guns on each other, should turn their anger and their focus on their own capitalist class, on their own bosses. And of course, alongside Lenin, Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht were notable exceptions when it came to opposing the World War from the left. And so too, of course, John Maclean. John Maclean understood clearly and vividly, and he argued consistently in all kinds of different ways, which I'll talk about briefly, that World War I was a war for markets, a war for imperialism, and that it was used domestically to destroy the lives of workers. Rents were shooting up. They were relying on poor rations, for example. Their civil rights to organise in the workplace had been debilitated. and the opportunity for working class people to come together and fight against their own government and own ruling class was being subjugated every single day in the ruling class press. But not just the ruling class press. The left press at the time refused, for example, to take anti-war articles. And I want to, at this point, kind of mention, I think in the UK, the key turning point when it comes to the left in World War I. Keir Hardie, who's much revered and for many good reasons, initially opposed the war. But he then came to a conclusion, I think a wrong conclusion, and John Maclean of course disagreed, where he said, a nation at war must be united. With the boom of enemy guns within earshot, the lads who have gone forth to fight must not be disheartened by any discordant note at home. And so you can see how that would completely disorientate the working class movement of the day, that such a leader, of such calibre, would take that position. And it was from then that support from the anti-war movement waned, and that's why the left-wing press even refused to take anti-war articles. So Maclean's was completely disgusted by this, completely disgusted by the way in which the Socialist International had dealt with the question of the war. But when you think about it, and I come back to this word tenacity, when you think about it, the struggles that had been leading up to World War I, the potential of the situation, the fact that the Russian Revolution is just round the corner, you're in a situation where you're isolated on the left, working class organisation is fragmented, the ability to organise is severely undermined to the point of you're just immediately arrested if you talk about these things, as John Maclean was. Then it's a very difficult situation. And it seems to me that the mark of a revolutionary, and something which ran through the veins of John Maclean, was that often you'll find yourself in a minority. But just because you're in a minority doesn't mean you're wrong. And if you have the courage of your convictions, based on a Marxist analysis as John Maclean had, then he would of course continue to fight a very, very difficult fight. Not just against the ruling class, not just against the question of the war, but even against sections of the left. He did this in a number of ways. The first was that he wanted to point out some hypocrisies, and he did this in the courtyards of the tenements, he did this on the street corners and in classrooms, where he made some pretty interesting points, and I want you to think about how they apply today. One of the points he made was he exposed the hypocrisy of the weapons manufacturers based in the UK. Because what was happening was they were producing weapons in the UK and selling them to apparently neutral countries. But these countries were then funneling them into the German army. And so this example, we explained to people and showed people that this was a war for profit, this was a war that had no interest in ordinary people's lives, no matter what country they came from, and that this was a war that was based on the strategic interests of each individual nation state. And therefore, why should, given that this all has a negative effect on the international working class, you support the war? And he also did other things. So, for example, the rents were going up, as I described, the clampdown on workers. He was able to make the point that why are we being sent off to war, to kill, to be killed, when at home we're being given the most derisory working conditions, the most derisory living conditions. And it's this level of politics, which I think was necessary at the time, that was going to overlap on future struggles to come. But when you think about today, I think there are lots of similarities that you could make. The weapons manufacturers, where it goes, the fact that, for example, the war on terror also comes alongside a clampdown on civil liberties. The fact that there's an attempt to raise patriotism above class interest. All of these things you can see today. And it does go to show, I mean, one of the kind of things that you sometimes hear is, oh, this happened ages ago, these people are kind of old and has-beens and we need to look towards new ideas and so on. And in lots of ways I think that's true. Not everything has remained the same. But actually the kernel of how the system works and the kernel of how you oppose it, I think remains the same, and that's why we have to look at our history. Now, this all happening, and earlier I talked about not just the tenacity of John Maclean, but of the working class as a whole. And despite great setbacks caused by the war, there were new shoots of opposition and resistance which began to emerge. One example is the Engineers Union, which put forward a claim in Glasgow, which put forward a claim for a 2-penny raise in wages per hour, and they succeeded in getting 1 penny in rise in wages per hour. And okay, that wasn't an outright victory, but you're starting from a level of struggle where people are just beginning to start to get confidence back in themselves to organise. They also used the example of a worker at the Parkhead Forge who was actually jailed because the bosses said that he was slacking and causing others to slack. And remember, this is all built into the order. And solidarity didn't disappear because the rest of the workplace went on strike and he was reinstated. Again, not something that you would necessarily point to as a historic struggle, although in my view it is. It was all part of building back that confidence. They also started to reorganise things like the Clyde Workers' Committee. The Clyde Workers' Committee was an organisation of rank and file workers. Often the trade union leaders would be hesitant to take action, would perform a kind of neutral role almost as well in big struggles. And it was felt that workers themselves needed to be organised so that if the trade union leaders refused to take action or didn't push an initiative forward, then they themselves could do so. Maclean was never actually a member of this organisation, and he had his own comments to make about it, primarily that he wanted to elevate the particular struggles of these workers to a more broadly based political project of opposition to capitalism, involving questions like the war, involving questions like the rent campaign. But such was his gravitas within the movement, he was of course welcome to speak at their meetings and to make contributions and comments to them. So things start to emerge basically, and there's a revival of confidence. The word confidence is something that arises again and again, and revolutionary politics is essentially based on working class confidence. If people are confident that they can fight, confident that they can win, they're more likely to take part in political struggle. If confidence is low, on the other hand, far less likely. And this is absolutely the case today. John Maclean intimately understood this. He understood that it was absolutely necessary for these events to take place so that they could restart the project of a thoroughgoing revolutionary approach to developing all of these struggles. Now, Maclean saw the rent strikes as a chance to link those struggles up, and in 1915, 30,000 tenants in Glasgow were refusing to pay any rent. And not only that, whenever there was an attempted eviction, they would be swarmed with hundreds of people from the local area that would come out and would defend people from being evicted from their homes. Mass demonstrations and resistance would meet the sheriff officers every time they tried to evict someone. And this again is something which people are working on today. In October 2015, there was a huge demonstration in St Enoch Square demanding that the government take immediate action to stop rent racketeers. And in November of that year, John Maclean was brought before the Sheriff Court on a summary charge under the Defence of the Realm Act. And again, this was because he was trying to stop recruitment to the British forces in the army. At this time, large crowds of Maclean supporters were assembled in the court, and many of those who were assembled in the court, this is absolutely crucial, actually downed tools for the day. They walked out of their workplace and they went down to the court. Now, imagine the level of political and class consciousness that this entails. Imagine something like this happening today, where people actually get out of their workplace and go down to support someone who's organising campaigns and organising revolutionary action. There was a serious press campaign, of course, to try and discredit not only John Maclean, but those he was working with at the time. When it came down to it, there was 6 counts of indictment against him, and he was attending public meetings, but at the same time he was trying to prejudice this recruitment to the British war drive, and those were the kind of charges against him. So the charges against him are things like, you're making a speech to try and stop people joining the war drive, you're making a speech that is trying to agitate at a time where we need absolute unity. And here it's just worth just briefly tying that back to the different perspectives that were taken on the left. I mean, how much does it undermine someone like John Maclean's case, or indeed anyone who's fighting back's case, if you've taken a position previously which says we need to unite for the war drive and that we shouldn't have discord at home? It's very important, I think, that we understand that. So when I said earlier that his position on the war would begin to overlap on future struggles, that's what I meant. That his cast iron opposition to the war allowed him the political flexibility to say that he was not only opposing the rent hikes, but he was also opposing the war, and therefore the consistency that he was building of a position that opposed the ruling class of the day shone through. Now, he was found guilty, and it was around this time that, and often there's parallels drawn between the two, that James Connolly led the Easter Rising in Dublin, and at the same time as John Maclean was in Carlton Jail, Connolly was in Dublin Castle. This is where we get to something quite exciting. I'm trying to carefully chart the development of the war, the upspring of new struggles and emerging confidence after it being dashed for the reasons I've outlined. And that is that the Russian Revolution comes along. And in May Day in 1917, 70,000 people, just imagine that, 70,000 people marched to the streets of Glasgow in solidarity with the February Revolution in Russia, demanding the release also at the same time of John Maclean. So you've got 70,000 Glaswegians marching to George Square supporting a revolutionary project in Russia while demanding the release of a leading revolutionary who's incarcerated by the British state because he's arguing for sedition. So clearly a moment of massive, massive crisis and massive opportunity, a moment of war and revolution. And at the end of May, 100,000 people marched to Glasgow Green to demand Maclean's release and to protest against Lloyd George. Workers were regaining their confidence, there was a militant mood, developments in Russia, people on the march again, a rising consciousness about the meaning of the war. Maclean was released following the campaign in June of 1917. You know where this is all leading towards, it's getting quite exciting. He only served half his sentence. So this is a huge victory that popular power is able to get the release of John Maclean. You'll notice that at each and every turn there's a relationship between John Maclean and the mass of ordinary people. That's really the test of a revolutionary. You can talk about nice ideas in a meeting, you can talk about your theory, but unless you've got that living link with ordinary people, then I'm afraid you're not up to the task, and it's a difficult task. His weekly classes at this point were also booming. 500 in Glasgow, 100 in Govan itself, 300 in Lanarkshire, 125 in Greenock, just giving you some examples of the kind of turnouts that he was getting. By the way, these classes were not a tea party. These classes were talking about Marxist economics, they were talking about really big and complicated ideas. And John Maclean never was going to shy away from this. He had respect for working class people. And he respected working class people because he said that actually this knowledge is for us, this knowledge is for everyone. He believed in a university of Marxist ideas, one that was living and breathing with life. And I think that's something we've got to think about, because often I think the left today kind of feels that, well, we can't talk about big political ideas, we can only talk about the bread and butter, because that's all that people are interested in. I completely disagree with that. I think people are very interested in big political ideas. And by the way, even if that wasn't the case, you still get a responsibility to put those ideas forward, just as John McClain did. Now, October 1917 comes along. Lenin and Trotsky's Bolsheviks led a successful revolution in Russia, and this was greeted with scenes of jubilation in Glasgow. This is where McClain, completely reinvigorated by all of the developments that have taken place. So, it's a wee bit moving when you actually think about it, because these are ordinary people who's doing this. This is when he was given the council, this is when he was given the Soviet council, and this is where there was this real link that was built between him and between the Russian Revolution, between people in Glasgow and people in Russia. You know, I wanted to say something about internationalism, because that's real internationalism. This is what McClain was talking about. He wasn't talking about something like the EU, right? Whatever your view on Brexit, he wasn't talking about some imposed from above pseudo-internationalism. He was talking about working class internationalism, struggle-based internationalism. He was basing this whole concept, as Lenin was, on the idea that revolutions had to take place across Europe and across the world. And one of the big problems, of course, was that this didn't happen. There was a huge mood in Britain around the question of the Russian Revolution. There was a huge mood, huge revolutionary fervour, and there was a huge crisis taking place in the ruling class. There were food shortages. There were all kinds of organisations springing to life, demonstrations, meetings. But there was one element that was missing, and that was there being a mass revolutionary party. Lenin is unique because he understands the need for a form of organisation that is able to take a revolutionary process from beginning to a conclusion. And that was lacking when it came to the situation in Britain. And also, this is another, I think, key point, and something that we need to learn from, is that the Clydesiders could have led the way. John McClain really did believe that Glasgow could become a storm centre of the revolution. And if you think about it, Glasgow was performing a very, very important strategic role for the ruling class. This is where the warships were getting built. This is where there were huge factories that were contributing towards those kinds of things. And so he understood the strategic element involved in taking Glasgow. And what happened was, there was a call for a general strike that came from the Clyde Workers' Committee, and the reaction of the trade union leaders was to say something like the following. This is a quote from one of them. "If only we could be certain that the German workers would follow suit, we would have no hesitation in calling for an immediate policy of downing tools and damn the consequences. But we are not in touch with our fellow workers in Germany, and it may be that they are willing to do the bidding of their warlords." Just think about that. There's a call for a general strike that's come from below. The trade union leaders, and you've seen trade union leaders do this before, where they say, yes, it's a good idea, but here's why we can't do it. Well, within days of that statement, 400,000 German workers went on strike against the war. There were mutinies in the army, the navy, the police, and in towns and cities across Germany where they were under the control of workers' councils. Now, talk about missing an opportunity. But it's not just the point of missing an opportunity, it's the level of understanding that you need, the level of understanding about how internationalism works, about how struggles build off each other, about how struggles develop alongside each other. That's what was missing, and it needed there to be a revolutionary party that could follow that through. So, in this context, McClain undertook extensive work in the Durham coalfields, advocating revolution everywhere he went. Huge crowds turned out to hear him. He'd been touring the country, calling for a strike against the war on the 1st of May, which of course is International Workers' Day. Following yet another detention, the Glasgow May Day Committee called for the May Day demonstration to be held on the 1st of May, which on this occasion was on a Wednesday. So if you know about May Day, usually you don't go through marching the streets during a weekday, it's the closest Saturday or Sunday to the 1st, not on this occasion. And for the first time it was held on a day other than a Sunday. And of course the press called it for it to be banned, there was huge pressure put on it. Over 100,000 people, 100,000 workers put down tools and took to the streets to attend the rally. Then they marched in solidarity to the Duke Street jail where John McLean was at this point incarcerated. And it's often said that he would have been able to hear them from his cell, so think about how that kept him going. John McLean would never have been into hero worship, by the way. He would never have been into the idea that it was him that was all important. And the idea that he was kept going by the mass of people is really important here, right? The whole essence of his politics is to start from below, to start with ordinary people fighting back. So, McLean seized the opportunity when he was in the dock, and of course you know the famous quotes, where he was going to get sent down again, and I'll read the quote, which you'll know, but it's worth reading again at this point, because I think it really does bring together the essence of the moment. Knowing that he was going to be condemned, he said, "No human being on the face of the earth, no government is going to take away from me my right to speak, my right to protest against wrong, my right to do everything that is for the benefit of mankind. I am here then, not as the accused, but as the accuser of capitalism, dripping with blood from head to foot." And it was. And ordinary people knew that, because millions of people were dying in the war. They were dying from food shortages or from conditions living at home which were leading to all kinds of disease. The jury, of course, found him guilty. And 1920, just skipping back slightly, in 1920 there may have been an opportunity, and this is where there's debate, this is where there's something that we may draw out of the discussion. There was a bringing together of a Britain-wide socialist organisation. And McLean, a British-wide Communist Party, and McLean was never actually part of this process. And one of the big debates that people have on the left is whether or not he should have been part of that process. Because what he was arguing instead was for there to be the development of a Scottish Communist Party. He said, "I hold that the British Empire is the biggest menace to the human race. We on the Clyde have a mighty mission to fulfil. We can make Glasgow a Petrograd, a revolutionary storm centre second to none. A Scottish breakaway at this juncture would bring the empire crashing to the ground and free the waiting workers of the world." His analysis was that you couldn't fight a British-wide revolution against the British ruling class, and that what you needed to do was to address the specific circumstances in Scotland. And that's why he developed that kind of analysis. Now, I feel personally mixed about this, because I agree with him on that level, but I also think that it would have made a real difference to the situation had he been involved in the development of the British Communist Party. And it's a difficult decision to make. And it's especially difficult when you're in and out of jail, when your health is being destroyed by political struggle, permanent political struggle. And I think that's a debate, and that's why there is a debate. But I do want to reinforce something I said at the start, which is that what's not in question is his morality on this. What's not in question is his personal opinion, or the veracity of it. He held it, and held it genuinely, because for his whole life that's what he's done. He's argued his position, and he's put it forward, and he's done so in a way which, even if he was in a minority, then he would still pursue that course of action had he thought it to be right. So that's not a debate, but there is a debate about his particular actions there. I think that when you look at what happened after that, the socialist, the Scottish Workers' Republican Party, which he formed, never really took off. In fact, it polled 623 votes out of a total of 8,190. In fact, that was his vote when he stood, when he was released from jail. And he was weakened by poor health. He was never really able to fully engage with that election. His health suffered greatly in prison. It's what led him to his death. He was concerned about prison food being poisoned, and he was being forced fed, as I said, by the authorities. This was via a rubber hose that was put down his throat twice a day by prison wardens. So, as I say, the end of his life, he died on the 30th of November, St Andrew's Day. He died at a time where there's a tipping point across Europe when it comes to the revolutionary process. And what was absolutely vital was not just what happened in Britain, but also what was going to happen in Germany. And this could have changed the outcome of history. This could have been the development of a socialist Europe, which would have meant, by the way, that there would be no World War II, that there would be no Adolf Hitler, and so on. But what was missing lots of the times was the question of revolutionary organisation. And this is why lots of people, even today, look towards Lenin. Now, I'm not saying that Lenin can't be criticised, but what I'm saying is that there is something to his thought, to his idea of organisation, which we have to take seriously. So what I'm going to do now is just end on these points. What we take from the claim, I think, is the following. One is the primacy of politics. No matter what struggle you're involved in, that you're part of an overarching political struggle. No matter what struggle you're involved in, it's not the only struggle. You have to connect it with others. That's something he did time and time again. He was against sectionalism. He was against the idea that one group of workers fighting for wages were only concerned with their wages and their workplace. So when you look at a strike today, and you look at, for example, I don't know, PCS going on strike against public sector cuts, it's vital that it's not just seen as their struggle, but that it's connected up. He was against imperialism. He understood how imperialism worked. He understood the need for ordinary people to oppose it, because it's ordinary people that get sent off to die in imperialist wars. And that's the case today. When you look at something like the war in Iraq, it's the oil corporations, it's the weapons manufacturers, it's all of these people that make the money. It's working class people that go off and die in the wars, and when they come back, just like back then, although in a different setting, they're hit with austerity, they're hit with rents they can't afford, they're hit with low wages, precarious work contracts and food banks. It's the same system, deploying the same mechanisms. He was for real internationalism, not this fuzzy liberal internationalism that somehow says that Apple and Microsoft and all of these people are leading the charge for some kind of international neoliberal framework which is going to overcome racism and division in the working class. Not the EU, as I say, no matter your view on the EU, not the European Union, but ordinary people linking arms across the world. The centrality of the state, he came up against the state time and time again. When you think about any great struggle, the miners' strike, the poll tax, what's happening in Catalonia, any great struggle, the state is deployed against ordinary people. Ordinary people don't want violence. We don't want violence. We're not in favour of taking part in some kind of armed insurrection for the sake of it. Violence is visited upon people who start to take their struggle to the point where it starts to really threaten the power of the ruling class. So I think those, and I know I've probably went on a bit longer than I was expecting to, but hopefully that's given not just an overview of some of the most important elements of John Macquaig's political struggle, but clearly why we still need the elements of his politics today, why we still need a revolutionary approach to politics, why we still need to go above and beyond parliamentary organisation. We must go beyond the institutions of the Parliament to build real power from below. It's becoming now not a choice, not an option, but a necessity that we organise on this basis. We need a new system. Look at the environmental crisis. Look at the fact that Donald Trump has retweeted an actual fascist today, the President of the United States. We need to build struggle based on class, based on revolutionary ideas, based on the idea that united we're stronger. That goes not just for Scotland, but across the world. And I'll end on this. It's because of all this that John Maclean was seen as the Scottish link in the golden chain of world socialism.